Hello, everybody. We have a terrific event tonight. So many people are here. That's great. Even Barry is here. Love to see that. So tonight, this is a panel discussion about the impact cartoons have on public opinion. And the moderator is Joyce Marcel, award-winning journalist, and also who does all the cover stories for Vermont Business Magazine. This program is brought to you by Vermont Independent Media, but also the Media Mentoring Project, which is a very important project of Vermont Independent Media. We believe in education, educating the public about the media, how they can use the media, how they can get their voices, opinions across. And we're also in process of our raising our big campaign, annual campaign, trying to raise $100,000. We are halfway there, but we just got some kind of a new opportunity where if we can find 100 new donors at $5 a piece or however much you wanted to give, we will be granted an extra $1,000 toward our campaign. So everybody who reads the comments and you haven't donated, this might be something to think about. Now I'm going to turn it over to Joyce, and she's going to introduce our panelists.
Okay, thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
We get started. Cartooning, they say, is part art and part literature, but that's not the half of it. Cartoons have power, and cartooning can be dangerous. People have been killed for drawing cartoons. Tonight, we have with us cartoonists who represent three different aspects of the art. With the political cartoon, the big leaguer who has drawn Superman, and the indie cartoonist who used the comic strip to build community. And all three have deep roots in Vermont. And that's not a surprise, because Vermont takes cartooning seriously. The state has had 4 cartoon laureates, 3 more than any other state. And you can't fault the state for picking heavyweights, including Alison Bechdel and Ed Koren. A third cartoon laureate we are honored to have with us tonight, Rick Veitch, and probably syndicated political cartoonist Jeff Danziger, who is also here, may be another. Who knows? Rick Veitch, who was born in Bellows Falls, has had a long career in cartooning that started when he was still in high school. He has drawn such famous cartoons like Superman and Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing, by the way, ended in controversy in 1989 when DC Comics refused to publish a finished issue in which Swamp Thing traveled back in time and met Jesus. So he also runs an educational comics business that specializes in creating comics for learning and literacy. His clients include PBS, Wired Magazine, the Vermont Folklife Center, the University of Quebec, University of Vermont, and the International Monetary Fund. He recently completed The Outliers, a 3-book series for McGraw-Hill Education, pioneering the use of modern graphic novel storytelling techniques, sorry for reading, to teach math to middle schoolers. He also publishes a dream diary in comic book form. Jeff Danziger is a brilliant political cartoonist, syndicated worldwide. He was a finalist in 1993 for the Pulitzer Prize. He's been awarded the Herblock Prize, the Thomas Nast Prize, and he's a decorated Vietnam veteran. He has produced 10 books of cartoons, a children's book, The Champlain Monster, and a novel about the Vietnam War. Danziger was born in New York City. His 40-year cartooning career has included working with the New York Daily News, the Rutland Herald, and the Christian Science Monitor. His cartoons appear regularly on Vermont Digger website. Danziger cartoons and commentary make a sense of how satire and its graphic equivalent, cartooning, can be both a scold and a guide in years of continuing crisis. His newest cartoon, which he just posted on Digger today, is of arms dealer Victor Bolt going home to his family and giving everyone weapons for Christmas, including Casualty Barbie, I think I'm going to love that image for a long time. So Dan Barlow has been, well, I've lost that page.
Sorry.
It's your fault, Dan.
It's a much shorter biography than the other two gentlemen, so.
Yeah, you're the you formation of hills, trees and hills, which took form when independent non-superhero comics were becoming popular and the art form was recognized as legitimate literature. The group's formation occurred before social media took over our lives and was a conduit for nearly 100 creators across New England to connect, collaborate, and learn from each other. The organization worked to build a community among comic creators in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Western Massachusetts, and held dozen events. The 2010 anthology Seeds was a minor hit. Dan wrote that, minor hit editorial comment on the indie comic scene, and the book included a packet of organic lettuce seeds. Of course it did. Dan is known on Facebook for his great love of Archie comics, which he defends as showing us 80 years of societal change. Now, before we get started, I want to tell everyone who's listening in, if you have questions, you're on Zoom, put them in chat. We'll get around to that in a little while. So we're going to start off with Jeff. Are you there?
Yes, yes.
Great. Are you in Dummerston?
I am in Dummerston, yes.
Welcome back. You
Well,
live,
the traffic noise doesn't drown me out.
pardon me?
The traffic noise, I hope, doesn't drown us out.
In Dummerston, all those people going to the apple farm.
Yeah.
Really? So tell us how you got interested in drawing comics.
My parents were both artists, and there was always art materials around the house. My father was in advertising, and my mother was a portrait artist. They met at Cooper Union in New York City. They were both real New York, inner New York people. I love to draw. I enjoy drawing. I think it's the best thing to do. I don't really have a huge amount in the way of politics, but I have to try to, and I'm not actually a very funny person. So it's the drawing that is what I like about it mostly.
So how do you come up with ideas for political cartoons, or in this crazy age, do they just come at you hot and heavy and you have to bat them away with a fist?
No, I said, well, you have to do pre-Trump and after Trump.
Okay,
No,
pre-Trump.
pre-Trump, you had to work at it. And even with George W. Bush, who was clownish and said silly things. But after Trump, of course, it was, you had every morning, twice and three times a day, something stupid and unforgivable would happen. My father admired the work of Bill Malden. I just want to get some names in here in case anyone is interested in going and looking up these. Bill Malden was a World War II cartoonist, and he drew for Stars and Stripes. He was a marvelous artist, and he famously was chastised by General Patton, and General Patton's troops had to say, leave him alone, General.
You want to throw in some other names there?
Oh, other names?
Go ahead.
Well, sure. The great American cartoonist, of course, was Thomas Nast, who drew during the Civil War. He was a marvelous artist. He came to the United States from Germany and got involved in the Civil War. Did drawings for Harper's magazines on the scene in the war. The best American cartoonists of recent time have been Patrick Oliphant, who just retired a little while ago, and in addition to Malden, the long-time cartoonist Herbert Block, who drew for the Washington Post He died about, I think about 10 years ago. And he was not only a marvelous artist, but he was a terrific newspaper man. He thought that he established that the political cartoon should be part of the newspaper and part of what the reporting was.
Now, it seems to me that over the past 20 years, maybe shorter, there's been a bloodbath for political cartoonists in the United States. They've been either fired or dumbed down. You've succeeded in surviving. You want to talk about that a little? Why all of a sudden were newspapers afraid of opinion?
It's it's hard to say why newspapers do the things they do, and I wouldn't even hazard a guess. The New York Times, I think, has never had a cartoonist. I don't know why. The other cartoonists who have been either let go or laid off usually continue to do it. They go and get another job, and then they come home at night and do a cartoon. But I advised, a woman wrote to me and said, would I give her son some advice? And I said, yeah, get another job, get another profession, and then continue to do what you want to do. And there have been growths in other areas. I mean, there's been terrific growths in graphic novels, which are both powerful and gripping. They are powerful in this country. They are powerful around the world. I would mention just in passing, one of the strengths of it is that I have a friend who is a cartoonist in Burkina Faso, which is, everybody knows where Burkina Faso is. It's in West Africa. And he said that the reason the cartoons are valuable is because there are over 60 languages within the country of Burkina Faso. 30 of them are written down. So when the newspaper comes out, they would put a cartoon on the front page to show this graphically, even if people couldn't read the language in the articles, this is what we think about so-and-so. I thought that's a good example.
That is. I want to read something to you that just came in on the chat. I must say that every morning when I go to Vermont Digger, the first thing I do is scroll down to Jeff's cartoon to see if a new one has posted. And we can all relate, pre-Trump and post-Trump.
Thanks, Mom.
I did the same thing.
Yeah, well, good. I'm very grateful to you for doing that. Vermont Digger is a plus. The founder of Vermont Digger, Ann Galloway, a friend of mine, she was one of my editors at the Rutland Herald and Times Argus, which is still going on as a newspaper. They used to have competition from the Free Press, but that seems to be over. I'm under contract to take a shot at the Free Press anytime I can.
Could you talk about a little bit about how you do your drawings? I believe that you work digitally, don't you?
No, I work in pencil, which is the most forgiving of the art forms. We used to have to, back in the days when printing was a little more basic, we used to have to draw it in pencil and go over it in India ink and then erase it. But now the scanners are so good, and so and Photoshop program makes all the changes, whatever changes you want to make later on after you've scanned the pencil drawing in. So the technology has made a great deal of it. Technology always has. Anyway.
Okay. Someone wants to know, can you name some cartoonists whose artistry and wit you admire, but whose political viewpoints you don't?
Well, I think Oliphant was an Australian, and personally, I think he politically was something of a misogynist. He was certainly had the basic ingrown Australian racist sense of humor. Anyway, he wasn't a racist, but I admired his artwork. It was fine. I will say that the best artist in all time, who was a German what they call a sketchbook artist. He's sketchbook artist. His name was Heinrich Kley, Kley, and Dover Press has republished some of his drawings. They're very, very good. He was so good that it's depressing.
Okay, maybe you are funny after all.
Yeah, right.
So what have your experiences been with censorship? Have you ever been censored?
No, I don't think so. I am. Every once in a while, I'll do something, and the editors at my syndicate, which is a new one, will say, "Are you sure about that?" And no, well, but because we never know. There was censorship when the cartoons were done in a city at a local basis, and the newspaper didn't want to insult the mayor or somebody that they know. But on a national basis, you can pretty much say anything you want.
Wow, that's good to know. Can we have some of your cartoons up on the screen, please? You want to talk about this?
Yeah, this is a cartoon when the people from the various countries were trying to get in here, and the Trump administration, although this was done, I believe, during the early part of the Biden administration, but Trump was trying to keep them out, and they were being sent from Texas to Florida, and the governor of Florida was sending them, or the governor of Texas was sending them in a bus up to New York City. And I thought it was rather amazing that New York, which is where my grandfather and grandmother came through from Germany and Poland. And so the little girl is saying, "Look, Mama, it's the Statue of Liberty." I think that was one of the really important things for people coming to this country, especially from Europe, was when the boat got close enough to Ellis Island or close enough to New York that they could see the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah, but in a way, this is heartbreaking.
Well, yeah, sometimes it's good if they're heartbreaking. If people get caught up or have a catch in their throat, and they go, "Well, I guess that's right," you know.
Could we have the other one, the one that's part in Russian?
Well, this one was the cigarette lighter on the left actually did exist. It was done by somebody in Vietnam who wrote this piece of doggerel. "We are the unwilling, led by the unqualified, doing the unnecessary for the ungrateful." And that cigarette lighter was famous. And so I had the same cigarette lighter done, but in Russian. And the point was that Putin was impressing, conscripting soldiers, and some of them from way out in the hinterlands of the old Soviet Union or the Russian Federation. And so the cigarette lighter there says the same thing. I was drafted into the army during Vietnam, so I often feel that that's a anytime that happens to anybody, I say I'm moved by it.
And I think there's another cartoon. Okay, now this one is way back.
This is way back during the during the Trump-Hillary campaign, where we just didn't know where we wanted to go. I'll say I don't know who Uncle Sam actually is. He's useful for cartoonists, but whether or not it makes any, whether or not he actually defines anything, whether anything's definable, I really don't know. So you had the choice of shooting yourself with Hillary, who I thought was a terrible campaigner, although she probably would have made a much better president. And the choice was unenviable.
And suicide is painless. That's the theme from MASH.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, well, I just have one more question that I wanted to know. Has anything that you've drawn changed anything?
No.
Made something better, made something worse?
No.
No?
I don't think so.
Unlike Thomas Nast, for example.
Of course, Thomas Nast was not the nicest man in the world either. He didn't like all sorts of things. That he didn't like Catholics. He didn't like the Irish. He had a variety of. He didn't like the southern states, and to get rid of him, is a historical note. To get rid of him, they made him the ambassador to Tegucigalpa.
Kidding, really?
A terrible thing to do to anybody. Yes. Tegucigalpa is in Honduras.
Nicaragua.
What?
Nicaragua.
Nicaragua? No.
No?
And it's probably not in the country I suggested either. Yeah, he did. They sent him, and he got sick there, and then he came home and died.
Oh, well. What else can we say? Okay, well, thank you very much. Is there anything that you want to talk about that I haven't been smart enough to ask you?
All I can say is if you want to help journalism along, buy a paper.
Yes, definitely. Okay, then we'll move on to Dan, but we may come back to you, Jeff. Don't go away.
All right. Well,
Dan, you want to talk us through Trees and Hills?
Sure. Thanks, Joyce. And I just want to say I feel like a little bit of an imposter sandwiched between these two legends in their field who are still making innovative work today. And I've been a fan of both theirs for 20, 25 years. But I'm happy to be here to talk about my very minor role in cartooning. So I was of that generation who grew up on comic books, reading the Archie digest at the grocery store in the 1980s, and went on to superheroes in the early 1990s. And always loved the form, the storytelling, the medium. And as a young man in my 20s, I really wanted to get involved. But I'll be frank, I'm a much better writer than I am an artist. No one, frankly, really wants to see my art. And to tell the stories I wanted to tell, I knew I was struggling with my own art to get there. But making a comic seemed entirely complex. Again, I was used to reading these superhero comics put out by Marvel and DC, where each comic had, 8 people working to make this product reality. And what happened is I started meeting some local cartoonists, actually in the Brattleboro area where I was living at the time. And I remember one saying to me, mentioning DIY, and I had never heard that before. I'm like, what does that acronym stand for? And he was like, do it yourself. And I felt like a light bulb went off for me. And I realized if I want to make comics, and I'm putting up artificial barriers. To make a comic, all you have to do is get a pencil and a piece of paper. And I was, blocking myself from complicating really the creation of comic books. And so I started drawing my own comics and writing my own comics and collaborating with friends and meeting new people. And it all kind of came together back in 2005 in Brattleboro, when the Brattleboro Museum downtown hosted what's called a 24-hour comic book challenge. And the 24-hour comic book challenge is a challenge to create a 24-page comic book in 24 consecutive hours. So roughly 1 page per hour, and you essentially have to do this without sleeping over 24 hours. And I participated. It was me and 50 other people in downtown Brattleboro on a summer night in 2005, and we all created, our comics. And come 9 a.m. and I'm exhausted, but exhilarated that I've created, my very first comic. But what I discovered was that we had cartoonists, literally in the trees in the hills of New England, making comics, but mostly as a solo act. And they didn't have a community to connect with. This was before Facebook, before Twitter. I think maybe MySpace was around, but it still wasn't great for meeting people and connecting with people and collaborating with people. And so I met this my friend Colin Tedford from New Hampshire, and we formed the Trees and Hills Comics group and started hosting monthly drawing parties where we'd all meet at a mall in the food court, and all draw comics for an afternoon. And this led to some real experimentation, collaboration, and we quickly realized that there's a community that was really really wanted to get together and didn't have a platform or a conduit to do that. And Trees and Hills as an organization, as a small, independent comics organization, did become kind of, the center of a lot of that energy for a couple of years. So that's the origin of the Trees and Hills Comics Group.
And it was successful?
Successful. We never made any money off of it. And I think, what makes what we were doing different than, say, what, Rick Veitch has done is, we were making mini comics, we were going to, Kinko's or Staples and photocopying our comics and then holding little parties where we'd fold them and staple them together. So this was small press, independent, and Rick's done a lot of independent publishing too. But this was like runs of a couple hundred copies, of small photocopied, almost, zine style comic books, which we're really seeing a resurgence in the mid to late 2000s, in that first decade there. Suddenly, people were again, realizing that this is a legitimate form of literature, that the storytelling possibilities are endless. Academics were paying attention. The publishers were starting to look for independent comic books to sign. They're all looking for the next Bone by Jeff Smith at that time, who was a big hit with Scholastic. So I would say we were successful in terms of achieving a community within New England of comic creators. But, I think our biggest hit was an anthology, Seeds, you mentioned. I think maybe there's 2,500 copies of that floating around somewhere, including 2,500 seed packets in each issue. And that was probably our most quote unquote successful comic we did.
So why did it end?
I think because we did what we wanted to do, and in many ways technology stepped in and other comics groups stepped in. I know for me, I stopped making comics kind of as a hobby when I transitioned from journalism to actually to becoming a lobbyist, and I suddenly found my life consumed with something else. But when looking back now, because it's been maybe almost 10 years since we published anything or held an event, we were recognizing that we had inspired other groups within New England to begin doing this on a smaller scale, or actually not even a smaller scale, a more localized scale. So we saw groups popping up in Boston who were doing what we were doing in Maine. And we kind of quickly realized that we had, done what we wanted to do. We had a community that had uplifted a whole bunch of cartoonists, who at that time were in their, 20s or early 30s, lifted them up, gave them a community, gave them a support network, and they were all achieving what they needed to do on their own.
Okay, why did you focus on socially conscious comics?
Yeah. I think it kind of ties into the idea that we were building a community, but also, I was a young man in my mid 20s, late 20s at that time, maybe. And we were really kind of, cartoonists at that time, especially the ones that were part of the collective, we weren't doing a lot of fiction comics. It was a lot of nonfiction comics. People were doing diary comics about their lives. They were writing about their neighbors, about their communities, about the obstacles, in their lives, the obstacles to their communities, the threats to their communities. And so that was just kind of the vibe, the flavor at the time that, the cartoonists that were part of Trees and Hills really wanted their comics to reflect their day-to-day life, what's concerning them every day. And so we found that this was a perfect medium to begin talking about not just problems, but also solutions. So our anthologies that we published, and we did 2 or 3 anthologies a year, went from, kind of not having a theme and just being a showcase for the talent of the group, to being themed around certain social issues. So we did an anthology of comics about housing and homelessness. We did one about water quality, and then we mentioned seeds, which was all about local food systems. Kind of our hook there was that, we included a packet of organic seeds in each issue, kind of going back to that DIY ethic, that each individual copy of our anthology had been like touched by one of the creators. And in fact, that comic also had a hand-printed apple stamp on it. I remember we had a great party where we all cut up apples and just stamped them in ink and did each cover. It was a lot of fun. So each individual issue kind of was its own piece of art too at the same time. But we've found a lot of success and got a lot of traction by publishing comics that, were offering solutions, or simply actually just, conversations about the problems that our communities are facing, as opposed to just, writing about, a new superhero.
Now you're doing a cartoon or a comic now? Do I remember you saying?
Yeah, I'm coming out of retirement. I've been actually writing my own contribution to H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. So I've actually just this week I finished my first draft of the script. It's called The Bride of Cthulhu, and I'm doing something interesting with this. I'm not going to draw it. I'm not going to hire an artist to draw it. I'm going to do it Fumetti style, and that's a Italian brand of comics where instead of art, you use photography. So I'm actually going to enlist all my friends, and we're going to dress up and we're going to act out the comic, and I'm going to shoot it and then turn those photos into comics. And so that's really exciting for me. But my other love, of course, has been researching and writing about Archie comics. That
was my next question.
Can we just transition right into that one?
Go right ahead.
As I said, I grew up reading Archie comics. They were just everywhere in the grocery stores growing up, the little digests. And as an adult, I came back to them about 10 years ago, and realized that they had some of the best cartoonists of their era working for them. Bob Montana, Dan DeCarlo, Sam Schwartz, Harry Lucy, Al Hartley. These were folks who were doing innovative things, but often actually getting uncredited, because for many years, Archie wouldn't even list who was writing the comics, who was drawing them. And so only fans who could see little clear notes about, knew the artists could pick out who was drawing what. But I have this running theory that Archie Comics, which has been publishing continuously for 80 years now, and of course Archie and Betty and Veronica and Jughead, they are perpetually 16 years old. They never age in these comics. And so what it becomes is really a mirror for societal change. And you can track evolutions in social movements, in the economy, and political beliefs through 80 years of Archie Comics. And Archie Comics has never been a trendsetter. They've always been reflective of the changes. Like, they're never creating social change. They just reflect social change after it happens. So you'll have Archie Comics from, even the early 1970s, ridiculing what they call women's lib, for example, but then a couple years later, they had Betty and Veronica come out and embrace being feminists. So you really see, again, the reflection of societal change through 80 years of Archie Comics.
Okay, I was going to ask you for an example, but then you gave one. Can you do another one?
A great one. And let's see, if you don't mind me screen sharing, let me get something.
Oh, that's right. You've got some video.
We'll give this one a try. 1 second. Let's see. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. Do people see an Archie comic?
Yep. Betty.
Okay. So this is an Archie comic by an artist I've become strangely obsessed with, by the name of Al Hartley. And Al Hartley did a a series of Christian-themed Archie comics in the 1970s. And Al had been drawing comics for decades before that, including, working with Stan Lee at Marvel Comics. He did a lot of romance comics. And sometime in the late 1960s, he had a mental breakdown and became he found himself like literally at the end of his rope, and his biography alludes to maybe suicidal thoughts. And he became a born again Christian. And somehow, and so he actually at the time was drawing a kind of smutty cartoon, and quit that, and without a job lined up, and then got a call the next day from Archie Comics, and they were looking for a new cartoonist. So he started working for Archie, and he started slipping in these mentions of Jesus and Christianity into the comics. And Archie Comics have always been very secular. There is a high school in Riverdale, there's stores, there's Pop's Diner, but they never mentioned churches in Riverdale at all. So this was a big change. And then somewhere in the early 1970s, he partnered with a Christian book publisher called Spire Publishing, and somehow convinced the owners of Archie Comics, at the time, John Goldwater, who was Jewish, to partner with this Christian publisher and allow Al Hartley to do Christian-themed Archie books. And so suddenly you had these Archie comics that he was publishing in cooperation with Spire Comics, that instead of talking about hamburgers, Jughead would be talking about the Bible. These are some bizarre, incredibly, weird comics where the characters often act completely, dissimilar to how they were in the traditional Archie comics. But really, it's fascinating because Al Hartley was really at the beginning stages of what we saw as the rise of the moral majority, here in the United States, that tying of the Republican Party to right-wing Christianity, and right-wing Christians mobilizing and really seizing political power in the United States, and then starting to engage in a lot of these culture wars. So you had these Archie comics where they were talking about pornography and abortion and stuff that would not get mentioned in the normal Archie lines. So I'm actually working on a long form essay right now about how Al Hartley kind of, got this deal between Spire and Archie Comics to do these comics, and what the lasting influence of this was. And these were, huge sellers. They were printed in, millions of copies of these comics were printed, and they were handed out at churches. They were handed out at religious fairs. This Archie became a tool in the right-wing Christian propaganda war of the 1970s.
Wow. I didn't know that. Are there other visuals that you've got?
That's the only one for that I brought for Archie. Let me stop screen sharing. Hold on. Let's see. How do I stop screen sharing?
Well, you could explain this very 1920s Christmas picture.
You're still seeing my desktop. Oh boy.
Try under some view options, Stan.
Yeah, I can't see. It's gone. It's not here for some reason.
How about escape?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't figure out how to get back to. Wait, there it is. Okay, I'm stop sharing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. So I can show one comic that I worked on. Let's see. So I'm going to start screen sharing again, and we'll mess it all up again. Let's see.
I've got you, Dan.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. So can you see my screen? I can't tell.
Yeah, we can see it.
What do you see the food chain comic here?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. So this is my comic that I did for the Seeds anthology that I mentioned. I've been a vegetarian since I've been 15 years old, and this comic dates back to about 2008. And I think I really kind of wanted to make a message. So this was from our anthology about local food systems and local food. And so we start with the family at the dinner table and the inquisitive child asking, where does our food come from, Dad? And then we kind of move and we show this idyllic farm, the mother cow and the baby cow, this nurturing image, and then the farm hands show up and round up the animals and move them into the slaughterhouse. So here we see the farm hands moving in the mother cow into the vans that take them over to the slaughterhouse, moving the animals into there, and it gets quite graphic there at the end with how the poor cow dies. And then we go back to the family, and the father hasn't answered, and the child says, "Dad," and then the father says, "Our food comes from the grocery store, son." Realizing that there's a truth that you can't shatter the innocence of the child at that moment. So this was the type of comics that we were publishing, in the mid to late 2000s at Trees and Hills peak. And I would note this is written by my friend Keith at the time and drawn by my friend Matt Reedsma, who I loved his art, and we did several comics together. Really, Matt and I really kind of blended very well as a writer and as an artist. We had very similar sensibilities.
Okay. That's almost as heartbreaking as Jeff Danziger's cartoon about the Latinos on the bus.
I'll take that as a compliment.
You should take that as a compliment. Now I'm speechless. Wow. That's pretty powerful stuff. So cartoons actually can have a major impact on us.
Absolutely. And
We think of cartoons as being jokes or Archie, but the reality is that they are profound.
Absolutely. And I think, what I keep on coming back to is this idea that if Trees and Hills has a legacy, it really is that letting people know that if they want to make a comic, they can just make a comic. You pick up a piece of paper and a pencil and make a comic. You don't have to wait for someone's permission to do that. You don't have to wait till you feel comfortable with your own writing or your art. Just create for the sake of creation. And that was, kind of one of our values as cartoonists at the time, was encouraging people from all, wherever they are on their journey as artists, to just create without judgment.
If someone wanted to know about the Archie story with the Christian influence taking over in the 70s, did it revert back?
Yes. So Al Hartley did about 15 to 20 Christian specific Archie comics. The mentions of Jesus stopped in the main comics that Archie was publishing, but the joint publications, he did about a dozen to 20 of those. And then Al, stopped working for Archie Comics sometime in the late 70s. And did more Christian publishing for a couple of years, but it never really stuck. And every once in a while, Archie, the new comics, will make a kind of a sarcastic reference to the brief period of born again Christianity that Archie has in his past.
Okay, I think we could talk about Archie for a long time, but we have one more panelist who is brilliant and amazing to talk to, and that would be you, Rick Veitch. Hi.
Hi.
So you've had to sit through all of this, 44 minutes of me babbling and them being brilliant, and now we get to talk about the amazing work that you've done. Can we talk first about the Dream Comics? Can you explain the spiritual side of that and what exactly they are?
Well, when I was in my early 20s, I began doing what is called dream work, which is essentially writing down your dreams and paying attention to them and trying to understand what they mean. That led me to reading Jung, who kind of gives you a pretty good model of the psyche and how dreaming works to stabilize us and to, keep us on track and to allow us to grow. I found that it did this in my life. Anybody who wants to get their act together a really great self-help thing to do is just to pay attention to your dreams. And after doing it for about 20 years, I had the opportunity to start turning it into comics. And that was like a revelation in the sense that when you're making art from your dreams, you get in a deeper understanding, kind of intuitive understanding than you do normally. And it was just like a really great growth period for me to do that kind of art. On one hand, it's a commercial art, you know, it sells comic books to a certain degree, but on a deeper level, it's me working out who and what I am as a human being.
Could we get an example? Is that possible? So,
Now, these are two different dreams from two
Okay.
different times. You can tell it was like 30 years ago because I've got a full head of hair and I'm much thinner. But, you know, essentially, when I wake up in the morning, I will take notes from whatever I can remember and in the dreams. And then during the week, when it came time to draw the comic, I would put those notes on the drawing board up in front of me. And I would realize you'd see that like the dream you had Monday was related to the dream you had Thursday. And in fact, they were the same dream, just kind of like broken up. And so a lot of times I'd bring those two together to make a complete unit. And, you know, it's all done in pen and ink. This is before digital, all hand lettered and everything too.
do you remember more and more of your dreams as you get more practiced with this?
Yeah, there's some tricks to it. But essentially, if you just, when you go to sleep at night, if you tell yourself, I want to remember the dream, then it really helps you do that.
Really?
The other trick is when you wake up in the morning, don't open your eyes. Because as soon as it gets light, the memory of your dreams will be gone. But if you keep your eyes closed and kind of transfer the dreaminess over into the memory cells, you'll get enough of it so that you can write it down and the whole dream can then be remembered.
And the value in this is?
Well, dreaming is kind of like a keel, a psychological keel to a boat, and it keeps us balanced. What I've learned later on in life, that it's also a kind of a channel to the deeper parts of ourselves and the deeper parts of nature. And I find myself being more in tune with like the living spirit of nature through the dream work that I've done. It kind of helps guide me into how to do that. It kind of guides meditation. You know, they kind of go hand in hand.
And you find that your dreams just keep hammering on the same point, or are they evolving as you evolve?
Oh, they're evolving as I evolve, and they're just ahead of me in terms of my growth. They're the unconscious. It's knowledge and information coming out of my own consciousness, unconsciousness, and so bit by bit, it's feeding me things that will make me live better and to be a better person. The trick is pay attention to it.
Wow, I think I'll start doing that. How can we see some of these? Where can we find these comics?
Well, if you go on Amazon.com, you can order the books.
How many books are there?
There are 4 collected volumes now.
Wow.
You know, it came out originally as a comic book series, and then we collect the various issues into paperbacks and hardcover books. The latest title, I should know this stuff so I could promote it. The latest title is Azoth, A-Z-O-T-H, and that was just released on Amazon.
Okay, well, that's amazing. So let's get to Swamp Thing. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm not a cartoon person, so I had to look this up. You want to talk, but to know that you had your hand on Superman is a very big deal for me. So maybe you should talk about this big time cartooning stuff.
Well, it's a big, long story, probably more than I can ever fit in, but I kind of landed in New York right in the early 1980s when comic books were kind of taking off. The 80s for comics are a lot like the 60s of music, where for a brief moment, the creators kind of burst through. They got rid of this whole censorship scheme. And there was about 10 years of like really great innovative comics being done that expanded what a superhero could be. You know, after about 10 years, the business kind of closed in on itself. But it was very much a grassroots creative energy. Same sort of thing that Dan was talking about, except at that point, you could get into the mainstream with it. And I happen to be fortunate enough to be there and to do that. The problem with superhero comics up to that time was that they were under a form of censorship. If you remember, the comic books would have this little stamp up in the corner that would say, approved by the Comics Code of America. This was a censorship scheme. So all comics were censored. And we kind of broke this in the 80s. That was part of what our whole creative impulse was, to get rid of this, not just the creators, but also the retailers and the fans. They just wanted to be rid of this censorship scheme. This kind of led to turning the superheroes ultra violent. And that's kind of where it's stuck right now. The superheroes that you see on screen are all like dark and twisted and evil, kind of like Superman. He's not like Superman anymore. He's like this dark thing, you know, and that's kind of the problem. It's very fascistic. It very much reflects the mood of the country right now, I'm afraid. I don't know how much it directs the mood of the country, but it needs to break out of that. And a lot of the other creators that I work with would really like to move the superhero in other directions than this ultra violent vigilante kind of thing that's going on right now. There's a lot more that it can be, but it's very much stuck. I think earlier today we were all sharing the pictures of Donald Trump as a superhero with like eye beams, you know, rays coming out of his eyes.
Yeah.
This is like a real thing that Donald Trump put out yesterday for a trading card scheme that he's got, NFT trading card scheme. So that we see that the weird way that superheroes and politics are merging right now. One of Donald Trump's biggest backers is Ike Perlmutter, who was the guy who just sold Marvel Comics to Disney. So superhero money is behind Trump, or was behind Trump in 2016.
Now, Dan told me, if I remember this correctly, that Superman was invented by two Jewish kids in Brooklyn who wanted something to stop Hitler or fascism.
No, even before that, he was a progressive. Superman would go after weapons manufacturers. He would go after corrupt senators. He would go up after wife beaters. He was like a progressive hero, and he was a huge success. People loved him. But right after he came out in 1937, World War II hit, and he got brought in as a propaganda unit. And that kind of destroyed that whole part of Superman. But the Superman we have today is a joke. He's like dark and twisted. He kills people. And the original Superman would never have done anything like that. They've kind of lost what Superman was really all about. And again, I think that's a reflection of the country itself. Like it's what the audience seems to want.
Really, what were they censoring comics about? Well, I mean, what was the issue there?
Everything. It started out in the 50s with horror comics, but comics are a powerful medium to release the Freudian id. All the crazy stuff that is in the subconscious can come through beautifully in comics. I think Robert Crumb is probably the perfect example of a guy who's just releasing all the mad shit that's in his mind. And this, as an art form, it's incredibly powerful, but this made people scared because in America, it was also a children's medium. And so there was a choice made in the 50s to keep it as a children's medium, to not allow it to grow, and to censor it. And there was an office in New York City, and every comic book had to go to that office and be graded by, there was like 30 or 40 women who worked there to all these standards. And so as kids growing up, we all kind of understood this, that these comics that we loved and were amazed by were still being held back by this code, this censorship code. And so by the time I hit the business in the 80s, that all began to break. It was like the ice floe was finally beginning to break, and we broke it. Unfortunately, as I said before, comics got stuck in that hyper-violent, the superheroes got stuck in that hyper-violent mode. And there's a lot more they could be other than vigilantes taking the law into their own hands and fighting endless battles.
Wow. It's hard to believe.
Well, I think, you know, we talk about censorship. It's like the way they work with politics now is a direct result of this censorship.
What do you mean by that?
Because, you know, it held this powerful art form in its grip for 25, 30 years. And when it finally broke, it moved it into this kind of dark direction where it was like everybody just wanted to just push it as far as it could go, just to get out from under the straitjacket of censorship. And so it kind of twisted it and warped it where it doesn't need to be that. Superheroes could be a lot of other things. Heroes don't just endlessly fight battles. You know, heroes are mythical beings who are transformed. They're given powers. They do fight monsters, but there's always something on the other end that they're working towards, the Holy Grail, or to get the ring into Mordor or whatever. But modern superheroes don't do that. They just kind of endlessly fight. And they're all kind of demented now.
No, I know what you mean. So you also do a lot of the educational comics. And we have one that we can show, which I found to be a revelation because I didn't know this farm existed. And now I want to search them out and write a story about them. Will
Yeah.
Can you talk about it a little? Explain to
Sure,
people
sure.
what we're talking about here?
Well, you know, I got kind of tired of working on superhero comics, and plus I was running into my own censorship issues. So a friend of mine, Steve Conley, and I started a company specializing in educational comics. I had met Will Eisner, who was one of the great, you know, geniuses of the whole comics medium when I was at school. And one of the things he told us was that one of the things comics could do best was to educate. And he said that the military at one point did a study on what was the best medium to teach people with. So they could teach their soldiers like how to clean weapons and stuff. And the study came up with comics. And so the military started a comic magazine to teach soldiers how to clean their weapons and to do all the things they got to do. It's still going today. But anyway, we took that to heart, and we went around to various educational publishers and pitched them the idea of doing comics to teach with. And the first people we really had luck with were McGraw-Hill Education out of Columbus. And we did a number of math workbooks, which are essentially graphic novels. They essentially, you know, have fantasy characters going through adventures, and they're running around and they're having the adventure. And after about 3 pages, they stop and they have to count the loot and figure out the ratios of silver to gold. And then they go have some more adventures, and then they have to figure out how to measure something that they have to cross. So you're putting these math problems into the middle of a graphic novel, and the characters have to solve the math. And it's a way of teaching kids how to do it and why to do it, because visually you can show these items. You know, be like the guy's measuring something, you can really show it in a comic book panel in a really good way. We've recently finished a project at UVM under a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities that's called Who Farms. And that is the story of 5 different farm families in Vermont and how they survive, how they go about doing their business. Some of them are immigrants, some of them are longtime farm families, some of them are young people just trying to get on the land. I think that will be released real soon. It's been done, you know, since last summer, so I think the book is due for release very soon.
Okay, can we have a picture of the Incas? Okay,
Yeah, this is
why
like
did this get sent? Why did you pick this one?
I just had to have had it on my computer, so it was an easy one to send. But this is like a double-page spread. They still have my weekly reader. You remember that when we were kids?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. So now it's called something else, but they run comics in it. And so this is a comic about, it teaches kids about the Incas and how they made these roads and how they had these runners and, you know, what their lives were like.
When did you draw this?
Oh, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Wow.
There was a whole series. There were 40 of them we did.
About the Incas or about other
No,
tribes?
each one was different. You know, just be some sort of historical, you know, graphic novel-y kind of thing.
Well, this is very good. And I happen to have spent a lot of time on these Inca trails.
Oh, no kidding.
I know a lot about them, and you got it right.
Well, that's part of the
Very
thing.
well.
When you're working with these educators, you got to get it right. I mean, there's a whole committee that everything we do goes in front of this committee, and they, you know, it's yay or nay. There was one thing we did a few years back. Do you remember that kind of mess there was where there was this textbook in Texas, I think, that said that slaves were imported laborers?
Yeah.
Remember that?
I
Well, we
do.
got caught in the middle of that, and we were doing a job for for an educational publisher at that time, and they had to go back and go through everything we had done for any possible hint of, like, you know, something that wasn't quite right, you know, anti-wokeness or something, I guess is the word for it. And so it can be really tedious, that part of it, getting it right, but it's got to be right. It's like the real thing.
Yeah, just to add on to that, the Incas were so good at running that they could catch fish in the sea, in the Pacific, in the morning, and it could be on the head Inca's plate in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And we're talking about 10,000, 20,000 foot mountains that they're running over.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, then when you have an idea for an educational comic, do you pitch it or do they come to you?
They come to us. We're sort of like a go-to group now. When they decide they have some sort of cartooning project, you know, they'll get to us and, you know, we'll pitch it. We'll give them the price, the budget and stuff like that. And sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. It pays a lot better than regular superhero comics, I'm happy to say.
Well, we decided not to get into the economics of this, but damn, I wish we hadn't. Dan wants us to know that the Punisher is a great example of superheroes being co-opted by the right. His skull symbol is a rallying symbol from militias. Ugh. It's great to hear. Okay. outside of the humorous comics, for a long time, the reputation has been that comics is a boys' club. And I know that Aileen Kaminsky Crum died 2 weeks ago now. And I've had friends, female friends, who did comics in the 60s, underground comics back then. But it never really became an integrated, if you can use that word, art form. Can you speak about that? And that could be all three of you could speak about that.
Well, it's I don't know how many people know it, but Wonder Woman was supposedly created by a man. But it really it was really his wife and their lover who really came up with all the creative ideas. It was really an incredibly kinky comic in the 40s, where Wonder Woman and the villains were always like tying each other up and doing all this bondage stuff. And I guess that's what the couple or the triple were into. But it was like the women's role was just like dropped out, and the guy got his name all over it. And that's the way it was done in those days.
Joyce, just to jump in, growing up when I was reading comics in the 80s and early 90s, it was definitely still a boys' club. I didn't know any, girls my age who read comic books. That has completely changed over the last 20 or 30 years. Where I know when we were publishing our Trees and Hills anthologies, usually half or nearly half of the contributors to those books were women. Today, some of the most successful comics being published by either the comic companies or the book publishers are written and drawn by women. And there's this whole audience that, some of them are reading superhero comics, but for the most part, they're not, that they were brought into the industry reading Japanese manga or independent comics. And I think for years, the industry was just publishing comic books that mainly appealed to boys, but very quickly realized that there's a market here. And that has really, the transformation over the past 20 or 30 years is astonishing.
And I don't know if you guys are aware, but Vermont has this incredible newspaper called the Lady Broad Ledger. And this is a collective of women cartoonists that came out of CCS in White River. And it's the most amazing thing. It's like they cobbled together enough money to pay for the print run, printed it up as this free newspaper, and they're like leaving stacks of it around in Vermont where people can just pick it up for free.
What is it called again?
The Lady Broad Ledger. There's a story for you, Joyce.
Another one.
I could put you in contact with them, Joyce. Yeah.
It's
Okay,
an extraordinary thing.
That's good to hear. I'd love to see it. Okay, another question. A couple of you have said to make a comic, pick up a pencil. I could say to you to fix your car, pick up a wrench. You know it's not that simple. From whence comes your inspiration? How do you draw like an adult as opposed to a 6-year-old? And most important, how do you get published?
You want me to jump in?
Sure.
Well, what Dan does is like you just draw on paper and you just publish them yourself using a photocopier, or you publish it on the internet, which is really where a lot of people are right now. There's all kinds of different places to publish on the internet if you don't mind publishing for no money. That's the big problem. The problem of publishing anything for money right now is very difficult for all the creative arts. Everybody's scratching their heads, and the cartoonists especially are now looking at these artificial intelligence art generators, and which essentially can generate the most gorgeous, beautiful fantasy art with just a few verbal prompts. So we're all looking at that going like, hey, maybe we're out of business here pretty soon. We don't know yet.
Rick, I loved your answer there. And, I would say that who cares if you draw like a 6-year-old? Quite frankly, I think 6-year-olds can be some of the most creative, beings around. At that age, you haven't built that mechanism where your brain tells you but what you're producing isn't good or it doesn't have value. Society hasn't yet kind of, dug its claws into you and made you feel bad about something you like. I think 6-year-olds can make the best comics. And if you draw like a 6-year-old, draw your comic. Who cares? The important part is that you are creating something and that you are creating something that's meaningful to yourself.
And it's play. It's not
Yes.
work, it's play. It
That's
took me a
right.
lifetime to figure that out, but I finally got it.
No. And if I knew the secret of getting published, I wouldn't tell anybody. Go find it out for themselves.
Okay, here's a question for all of you. As the years go by, what is socially acceptable? He put that in quotes, or she put that in quotes. What are socially acceptable changes? Have you ever had to self-censor, or have you made a comic that may have been accepted 10, 20 years ago, but now is seen as offensive?
With me, it's just the opposite. I did a comic in 1984 with Alan Moore that graphically showed childbirth. And it was like this giant mess in the industry where retailers refused to sell it. Distributors refused to carry it. It was just crazy. But today it wouldn't be a problem at all.
Wow.
You see it on TV now. I did a cartoon, a political cartoon about the Indian tribes in, I guess it's in the northwest section of Vermont, who were getting appeals to go into the gambling business, go into which they've done in Massachusetts and Connecticut. And I think this is pretty horrible, almost unspeakable. The Indians, of course, thought it was, at least the ones that complained, thought it was just fine. And they wrote all sorts of letters and told me to mind my own business, which is, I tried to mind my own business. I wanted to say that one of the most famous working cartoonists in the country, maybe in the world, came from Vermont, and that's Frank Miller.
Mhm.
Frank Miller went, I was his English teacher, that's why I know, so I'll take as much credit as anybody will give me, but he went to New York, and I've kept in touch with him over the years. He's not terribly well these days, but he went to New York and he just kept sending stuff in and badgering these people, mostly I think Stan Lee. And finally they gave him an assignment on a romance comic. I haven't read a romance comic for a long time, but it was like, Blithering Hearts or Heaving Bosoms or something like that. And he was given a job as a romance penciler. So he did the original pencil work, and then somebody else inked it, and somebody else colored it, and somebody else lettered it. And then he didn't get any work for a while. And he finally went in and asked why. And they said, well, romance comics aren't selling, and we have you down here as a romance penciler. And he said, well, maybe I can do something else. Oh yeah, maybe that's a good point. Yeah. It's true.
And of course, yeah, Frank Miller would go on to be probably one of the biggest names in comics. And I just put out issue 1 of Ronin Volume 2, I think this month, through a new publisher. I think, were you 32, Jeff? Was that where you were teaching with?
Yes.
Yeah. I know Frank did I think a comic for the high school newspaper that was very heavily inspired by Will Eisner's The Spirit, which he was a big fan of at the time too.
Okay, well, I've run out of questions. Our audience has run out of questions. I was wondering if you guys had any questions for each other.
Wow.
Do we get paid for doing this?
Yeah, I wish. I get paid for doing this shit.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about how I got to go to art school, which is
Okay.
kind of a political thing. In the 70s, I come from Bellows Falls, which was like a dying mill town, so there wasn't any work. But our federal government at that time was still sort of functioning, and it had a jobs training program. And it sent me to art school. And it put me close to New York City, where the business was. And within a year or two, I got in there and I had work, and I was all of a sudden I had gone from being a poor kid to a middle class income, and the money they gave me, I paid it all back in taxes and continue over the years paying taxes and paying it all back. The reason I tell the story is it kind of fits in with what Bernie Sanders wants to do with free education for everybody. And I have to say, in my own case, it made a huge difference in my life. I probably would not have attained the middle class without it. And the material that came out of my imagination made money for everybody else up and down the line as well. The publishers, the distributors, film companies, all that stuff. So I think it's a good thing in my own case, and I would like to see it for other people as well, to invest in the creative talents that are out there among the poorer classes. I wish our government could do that. They don't have such grants these days.
Important. Any other questions or statements? Well, I'm going to wind this down then by saying it's been really interesting, and I've enjoyed this so much, and I am sure that our audience has enjoyed it as well. We had over 30 people listening. It will be a program on BCTV later on that will be widely available. I think it even goes to YouTube, and want to thank you for doing this. And I think Lynn has something to say.
I do. I want to also thank everybody for coming to this. It was one of our better events, I would say. And I don't know, Helena, did you get something from me that you could post?
Oh,
Anyway, I have an 8-year-old granddaughter in Australia who has done an entire comic book all by herself. She wrote it. She, did all the drawings, and it was all based on Peppa Pig. And if you don't have grandchildren or children, you probably don't know what Peppa Pig is, but Peppa Pig is probably, if not the most, must be the most popular TV comic in the world. And I was hoping she could just put it up. We actually turned it into we actually bound it. We were so proud. Anyway, I think it does say, and what you were saying about how you got into school and how that you learned how to do art. I would say, I'm just speaking for Australia schools for a moment, and how they are, they really do work with the kids. And she even dedicates it. And then she has table of contents, and at the very end, she has her biography. Anyway, you don't have to show the whole thing, but she also tells you how to draw Peppa and the family. But so, this is the kind of thing that can be very creative in schools, and having kids, do contests like comics like this. Anyway. It's also great later in life if you save this stuff and you go back and look at it. I've still got a bunch of my comics from when I was a kid, and it's kind of neat. Yeah. Well, anyway, I just wanted to say this is a media mentoring program. It's an educational program of VIM, Vermont Independent Media, that publishes the Commons. I think Karen, Kate O'Connor is still here. We are in the middle of our fundraising campaign, annual fundraising campaign. If anybody readers of the Commons, or even if you haven't been reading the Commons, we have an opportunity to raise an extra $1,000. If we can get 100 people who've never donated to donate $5, $1, we don't care. We just have to get 100 people to donate who've never donated before. And that's my message for tonight. And thank everybody for coming. It was a very interesting conversation. Joyce, you were terrific. And we'll see you all next time, which probably will be at the beginning of the year.
Okay. Happy holidays, everyone, and thank you very, very much.
Thanks,
Thank
both.
you.
Thanks all. Good to see you, Dan.
You too, Lynn. And I love the comic.
Yeah, good. Oh, of course,
Proves
you
your
love it too.
Yeah.
Bye.
Good night.
Night.